Later this week will be the 60th birthday of an athlete in professional sports who is simply known as the Great One. I'll confess that my knowledge of hockey begins and ends with the Disney Mighty Ducks movies from the 90s. But even I remember when I was younger, kids on the playground and at school talking about Wayne Gretzky. I was doing a little bit of reading about Gretzky this week, the Great One, as he's known for hockey fans, and found that certainly he was a prodigy when he was born and in his youth. He had his first pair of ice skates at 3 years old. I don't know how many kids can walk at 3 years old or run correctly, let alone skate on the ice and do drills with their father, according to his biography, or Wikipedia anyway. And by the time he retired from professional hockey, he held no less than 61 records in the NHL's history. 61. Amazing. And yet, despite all these successes, and this is my favorite part about stories about people who are great at something, because inevitably, at some point in their life or in their career, they are told that they are not. Certainly Wayne Gretzky, when he was younger, in his elementary years, was playing with kids in high school and was constantly playing with kids older than him, regardless of what level he was in, what tier of his career he was in. And when it came time to finally be drafted professionally, not for NHL, but for the leagues right before the NHL, several, amazing as it may sound, several teams passed on him in the NHL draft. And several scouts were saying what the other teams were thinking. He's too small, he's too slight of frame, he's going to get murdered when he gets to professional hockey, he's going to be slammed against the wall and all these other things. And so several people were telling him no. And in more than one instance in his life was the door, metaphorically and perhaps even literally, being shut right in his face. It's interesting with stories like these because we remember that Michael Jordan also was rejected from his high school basketball team. He didn't make the cut when tryouts came around. And other athletes as well. Russell Wilson was often thought to be too short of a quarterback. Walt Disney, for that matter. So many of his accomplishments in his life, many people were saying, this is never going to work. No, we will not finance this. We will not give money to this. Now theme parks are everywhere. The animated movie is big business, etc., etc. But in any case, the moral of the story here, my brothers and sisters, is that we may have all the ability in the world. We may have even belief in ourselves. We may know what the answer is, perhaps. Have confidence in our talents that God gave us. And still, no matter what the situation, no matter who we are, someone is going to shut the door on us. Someone is going to say no. Someone is going to say no. Do we ever run into this in our own life? Have we ever had doors closed in our faces? Do we have obstacles, perhaps, whether that be within our own family, people who don't believe in something that we're doing, or perhaps that it's going to work, maybe even friends or out there, co-workers, who knows, that prevent us from having a healthy and successful marriage, a good relationship with our children, furthering our career, perhaps, getting the vaccine. Do we ever hear no or not yet about that? Do we ever find that even with our relationship with God, perhaps, we might feel that the answer is no? These are all very, very good questions. And even in the case of our spiritual life, this definitely applies. Because we hear in today's gospel reading, my brothers and sisters, about a man who simply had just this take place. A man who had heard that Jesus of Nazareth was coming, and yet always heard the word no. He was screaming and crying and shouting to the crowd and could not get anywhere. And people were telling him, be quiet, go away. Somewhere else, please, you're bothering me. I can't hear what the master is saying or what the teacher is saying. And yet, what was the blind man's answer for this, and how was it even encouraged by Christ himself? It is stubborn, unrelenting, persistent perseverance. Stubborn, unrelenting perseverance is the answer in today's gospel passage, and, according even to the Lord himself, the answer to so many of our troubles in life as well. Even though the blind man had heard the word no many times, and he's not the only one in Scripture passages. We hear in some cases about the woman with the issue of blood, how the apostles said, no, get out of here, go away. But she knew where she had to go, and she knew that where she was going, to the Lord himself, that a difference could be made in her life. We hear other cases about Zacchaeus and so many others, parables that Jesus says about the widow who was pleading with the judge to finally let her, have what she wanted. And the judge, after many times rejecting her, finally relented and said, fine, give the woman what she wants, simply so that she can go away. The Lord himself uses these words, but I digress. To bring it back to the blind man knew what the answer was. Now, this is not to say that we always have the answer, but in some cases in life, sure as there is going to be rain today, sure as the sun will rise, we know what the answer is. This blind man, in his heart, knew that the Lord could heal him, knew that Jesus of Nazareth could have mercy on him. And fighting through the crowd and fighting through the naysayers, fighting through all the closed doors in his face, he finally approached Jesus. And how did the Lord answer him? What did he do? In the moment he finally approached, he said, what would you like me to do for you? Do any of us honestly think that the Lord himself, that God did not know what this man needed? Of course he knew already. Just like he knew with the woman with the issue of blood. What would you like me to do for you? How often do we hear this question before a miraculous healing? And yet we should ask ourselves, if God knows already exactly what we need, and each of us by name, and all of our circumstances and our struggles, one might ask, why would Jesus ask him? Why would he say, what would you like me to do for you? Probably even clearly, he could see that he was blind. He might have been walking with a stick. He might have had tattered clothes, perhaps, because he couldn't quite dress himself the right way. Why would Jesus ask? Because the Lord wanted him to say it. Because the Lord knows that the more we are in the habit, when we cultivate our prayer life, when we cultivate asking, Lord, please have mercy on me. Lord, please, could you possibly do this for me or for my family or whatever it might be? The Lord knows what we need, and yet we still pray. And of course we do, because that prayer life is part of that relationship. And like any parent that tells us, come on, gotta, pick up yourself off the floor and get back to work, get back to it. The Lord himself might say to us, in order to cultivate that persistence within us, might say, what would you like me to do? I want to hear. I want to have that conversation with you. I want to discuss these things with you. And so the blind man truly, my brothers and sisters, in this passage not only gives us an example of Jesus' compassion and his mercy, but he gives us an answer, by his perseverance, he gives us an answer, Jesus' answer to so many of the issues in our life. He shows us by his example that perseverance and stubborn persistence always wins out. Always is a good thing, even with God himself. Even with God himself. His perseverance won the day and ultimately got him to the feet of the Master. Got him to the feet of the Master, where he was healed. St. John of Kronstadt, who lived in Russia in the mid-19th century, one of my favorite contemporary saints. You know you're Orthodox when in A person in the 1800s is contemporary. But in any case, St. John of Kronstadt was a miracle worker. He was a parish priest, and he was in a town, and he wandered around, listening to people's sorrows and administering the sacraments and even healing them miraculously. Well, we hear many different stories about when St. John would visit parishioners and how things would take place when they were sick. Sometimes he visited them and prayed over them, and nothing happened. They passed away peacefully, simply. Sometimes he prayed for them, and they were healed instantly. And other times it was neither of those two things. There was one time in particular that I heard, or that I read in St. John of Kronstadt's life, that he went to a sick child. He went to the home of a mother and a sick child and anointed the child once and left. And came back the next day and anointed the child again, twice. Anointed the child again, a third time, 3 times. And then a 4th time, and a 5th time, and a 6th time, and a 7th time, an 8th time, a 9th time even. Still, no change in the child's illness. Finally, the 10th time, the child was healed. St. John somehow knew. He said, in his heart, in his closeness with the Lord, he knew that he had to take the extra step and go the extra mile and persevere and persist, regardless of how many seeming no's were given to him. The 10th time this child was healed, anointed with unction. Sometimes, my brothers and sisters, it is the struggle itself that is the reward, that it produces growth, of course, as we know. And yet, let us always remember to persist. Let us always remember that the Lord himself, as a loving parent, wants to hear from us, wants us to learn this beautiful quality, and also will sometimes relent to our request in our persistence and in our perseverance. It's kind of an unusual lesson to hear because one doesn't really think of our relationship with God as one that is simple or where we have to yell or shout. But yet the Lord sometimes shows us this in the New Testament. And I say this, my brothers and sisters, because so often, too often, I hear from you that you don't ask, we don't ask sometimes as Orthodox Christians, either because we don't feel like it's important enough for God's eyes, or we feel like it would be too selfish to ask for something for ourselves, certainly more than once, let alone as many times as the blind man asked. And yet Jesus shows us that he welcomes this. God is okay with continuous asking. He may answer us in other ways, but he is not going to turn us away. He's not going to close a door in our face every single time if we persist in our prayer. Let us always remember this, that wonderful things can be achieved, wonderful potential can be realized, as in the case of Gretzky, as I said in the beginning, when we simply believe, persist, and persevere. May we always remember this important lesson of our faith, knowing that the Lord always hears and has compassion on all of us. God bless you. Amen.